You've been told to think harder, focus longer, try more. But no one told you. Your mind was never built for chaos. It was trained for noise, not clarity. You don't have a weak mind. You have an untrained one, shaped by distractions, conditioned by urgency. And until you unlearn that training, peace will always feel out of reach. Most people don't struggle with intelligence. They struggle with alignment. You've learned how to chase results, how to react fast, how to move constantly. But you were never taught how to return, how to breathe, how to still the mind, not through force, but through presence. The truth is, your mind is like a blade, and without rhythm it dulls, without silence it trembles, without ritual it breaks under pressure. Monks don't build strength through information. They build it through awareness, through space, through discipline practiced daily in small, invisible ways. They don't run from the mind's noise. They watch it, shape it, refine it until the mind no longer controls them. They control the mind. Today, you'll learn how to undo the noise, retrain your mental wiring, and begin again, the monk way. From the moment you wake up, your mind is already responding, not by choice, by habit. You open your eyes, and before your breath has even deepened, you're flooded with input. Messages, headlines, notifications, noise. Without even realizing it, your brain is pulled into a state of alertness, not awareness. Alertness. This is not presence. This is survival. And this is how most people live, in a constant state of reaction. But here's the truth: you were not born this way. You were trained this way. You were trained to chase speed over stillness. You were trained to value answers over questions. You were trained to interpret silence as awkward and waiting as wasted time. Every time you reached for your phone instead of your breath, you repeated that training. Every time you reacted before reflecting, you strengthened the wire of urgency inside your nervous system. This wiring doesn't make you broken. It makes you conditioned. Your nervous system adapted to the noise, not because it liked it, but because it had no other choice. And now, your mind equates movement with meaning. But when the movement stops, you feel uneasy. The quiet feels unnatural. And this is where the damage hides, not in what's loud, but in what feels unfamiliar. You see, the modern world teaches people how to consume, not how to center. It rewards quick replies, fast scrolls, instant opinions, but it punishes pause. It makes you feel like you're falling behind if you're not constantly plugged in. So your mind learns to survive in fragments. You focus, but only in short bursts. You breathe, but only in urgency. You think, but rarely observe. And the more this cycle repeats, the more you believe that something is wrong with you. That you can't focus, that you're weak, that your mind is the problem. But your mind isn't weak. It's just overstimulated. It's just tired from being in reaction mode for so long that it forgot how to rest in awareness. Monks understand this. They don't see the reactive mind as a flaw. They see it as untrained energy. They don't fight the chaos. They create space around it. They train the mind to notice, not to suppress, but to witness. Because awareness is the first shift. You can't rewire what you can't see. You can't master what you keep escaping. So if your first instinct is to react, to interrupt, to respond before thinking, that's not because you lack discipline. It's because your environment, your habits, your patterns have shaped your responses into reflexes. But reflex is not destiny. It's just a repeated path. And any path, no matter how well worn, can be walked back. But to walk back, you need to slow down. You need to begin the difficult practice of noticing what you've never had time to see. You'll begin to catch the moments between the trigger and your reaction. The microseconds where your body flinches, your mind speeds up, your emotions try to take the wheel. And when you see that moment, you take your first step toward discipline. Not by stopping everything, but by pausing in that space. That space is everything. That space is where reactivity transforms into reflection. That space is where your real strength grows. But most people never access it because their minds are always sprinting to the next thing. They want solutions before understanding. They want clarity without stillness. They want peace without pause. But the mind doesn't work that way. It doesn't bend under pressure. It breaks. To rewire, you must return. Return to your breath. Return to your stillness. Return to a slower rhythm that allows your nervous system to settle. And from that place, you begin again. Not with force, but with awareness. This is why monks train in silence. Not because silence is magical, but because it removes distractions. It lets the mind meet itself without interference. And when you meet your mind without noise, you start to see what it's truly doing. You start to see how quickly it judges, how often it resists, how deeply it fears stillness. And you don't fix those things. You observe them. You train with them. You soften the response. And over time, the mind learns. It doesn't have to react every time something rises. The world may not give you silence. But that's not a reason to surrender your awareness. Because the real training doesn't begin when everything is peaceful. It begins when your world is loud. And you remain still. That stillness isn't emptiness. It's not avoidance. It's the power to choose. And that choice, the one you make in the space between the noise and your next move, is the beginning of mastery. You've been trained to react, but now you can train to reflect. That shift doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. And presence is not something you find. It's something you return to. One breath, one pause, one moment at a time. The mind wasn't designed to hold everything at once. It wasn't meant to be split between conversations, screens, deadlines, and the thousand silent pressures you carry each day. And yet, that's how most people live. Constantly connected, endlessly occupied, mentally scattered. Not because they want to be, because they think they have to be, because overstimulation has become the new normal. But normal doesn't mean healthy. Normal doesn't mean sustainable. And it certainly doesn't mean peaceful. The cost of mental overstimulation is not just fatigue. It's confusion. It's disconnection. It's living in a state of reaction so often that you forget what it feels like to simply be. You go through the day responding to everything but reflecting on nothing. You speak before understanding. You move before aligning. You think, but you don't feel. You decide, but you don't return. And somewhere in the middle of all that movement, you lose yourself. Not all at once, but in small, silent ways. You lose the sound of your own inner voice because it gets drowned out by everyone else's. You lose your clarity because the mind becomes a hallway with too many doors open. And eventually, you stop walking. You just spin. You don't realize it immediately. You call it stress. You call it being busy. But deep down, it's something else. It's disorientation. You no longer know what matters. Not because you don't care, but because your attention has been pulled in so many directions that it no longer remembers how to return to one. Monks understand this. They've seen what overstimulation does to the spirit. They've watched people try to fix themselves with more input, more learning, more content, more self-help, when what they actually needed was less. Not less wisdom, less noise, because wisdom doesn't come from stimulation. It comes from silence, But when you've been overstimulated for so long, silence feels uncomfortable, even threatening. That's the hidden damage. Overstimulation doesn't just overwhelm you. It rewires you to fear what's healthy. It makes you feel guilty for resting. It makes you anxious in quiet rooms. It makes you think productivity is the same thing as purpose. But the two are not equal. Productivity is motion. Purpose is meaning. And if your mind is always flooded, you will always be busy, but rarely clear. Mental overstimulation isn't just about technology or multitasking. It's about losing your center. It's about living outside yourself, always chasing, always proving, always escaping discomfort instead of sitting with it. And that constant running burns you out, not just emotionally, but spiritually. You wake up tired. You complete tasks but feel nothing. You have moments of success that feel strangely hollow. Not because you're ungrateful, because you're ungrounded. The solution isn't to do more. It's to return to less. Not because less is better, but because less is manageable. Less is breathable. Less creates space. And in that space the truth rises. But most people never give themselves that space. They think silence is unproductive, that stillness is laziness. But monks know the truth. Silence is a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. They simply reflect what you carry. If you've been overstimulated, it's not your fault. The world is designed to keep you that way. Every app, every alert, every algorithm is competing for your attention. And slowly, your brain becomes trained to seek stimulation instead of satisfaction. You can't sit still without checking your phone. You can't be alone without distraction. You feel more comfortable scrolling than breathing. But that comfort is not peace, it's dependence. And dependence is what dulls the mind over time. You begin to rely on outside input to feel alive. You begin to think fast equals valuable. You begin to live in response instead of presence. And you forget that your deepest clarity doesn't come when you're plugged in. It comes when you unplug. From the world, from expectation, from noise. Not forever, just long enough to hear what your soul has been whispering all along. Silence is not the absence of activity. It's the restoration of awareness. It's where your nervous system resets, where your thoughts slow down enough for you to see them clearly, where your body softens and your spirit can finally exhale. And in that exhale, you remember, you were never supposed to live this fast. You were never meant to absorb this much. You were not created for constant pressure. You were created for balance. The cost of overstimulation isn't paid in moments. It's paid in presence. And the only way to reclaim that presence is to make space again, not by deleting everything from your life, but by choosing when to engage, by honoring pauses, by saying no to things that demand your attention but don't deserve it. That's not withdrawal. That's wisdom. Monks don't avoid stimulation. They master their relationship with it. They know when to take in and when to let go. They know that clarity doesn't arrive through more. It arrives through space. And they protect that space not because they fear the world, but because they value their mind. They value their peace. They know that overstimulation is not a badge of honor. It's a signal to return. You can begin returning today, not with a massive change, with one decision: to step away, to sit still, to close your eyes without a goal, to breathe without counting, to exist without input. And as you do, you'll feel the weight of overstimulation begin to lift. Not all at once, but enough to breathe again, enough to begin again. That's the first sign of rewiring, when silence no longer scares you. When it becomes something you crave, not because it's empty, but because it's full. Full of the you that got lost. full of the wisdom you've been too busy to hear, full of the strength that doesn't rise in noise, but waits quietly, patiently, faithfully in stillness. Most people act first, think later, and feel exhausted by both. The pace of the world rewards fast responses, instant reactions, immediate opinions. We're conditioned to believe that urgency means importance and that quickness is power. But monks live by a different rhythm. They've learned a truth that most people overlook: not everything that demands your attention deserves your energy, and not everything that rises inside you needs a reaction. Before action, they train awareness. That awareness changes everything. The average person feels an emotion and follows it. They hear a voice in their mind and believe it. They feel discomfort and immediately try to fix it, solve it, or run from it. But monks pause. They don't rush into the moment. They meet it. Not with resistance, not with panic, but with observation. They watch the thought rise. They observe the emotion building. They notice the sensation in the body. And in that pause, just a breath, just a moment, there's clarity, not because the emotion disappeared, but because they didn't let it become their identity. That is the monk method. Awareness before action. It might seem small, but that pause, it's everything. It is the space where the mind stops being a slave and starts becoming a guide. It is where discipline is born, not through suppression, but through seeing clearly. Because what you can see, you can choose. And what you choose, you can shape. You've likely been trained to move fast, to fix, to react. But monks train themselves to wait, not out of hesitation, but out of mastery. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the inner work first. It means making room to understand what's really happening beneath the surface. Because most of the time, your reactions aren't about now. They're echoes of old experiences, of unhealed moments, of conditioned habits. You're not reacting to what's in front of you. You're reacting to what's inside of you. And if you can't see that, you can't stop it. Awareness allows you to interrupt the pattern. It lets you ask, why am I feeling this? Where is this coming from? Is this mine? Or something I picked up along the way? Those questions don't just bring insight. They give you the power to move differently, to speak from calm instead of chaos, to step forward with intention instead of fear, to act, not react. But awareness doesn't just happen. It's trained, it's practiced, it's repeated so many times in silence that eventually it starts to show up in motion. Monks sit with their thoughts not to escape them, but to learn their language. They return to the breath not to control the moment, but to remain inside of it. They observe the mind without trying to change it, because they know, once you see clearly, change begins on its own. You can't force the mind to be still, but you can train it to be observant, and that observation is the first doorway to freedom. Because when you observe, you realize you are not the emotion. You are not the fear. You are not even the thought. You are the awareness witnessing all of it. And when that awareness strengthens, you stop identifying with the storm. You become the space it moves through. That shift is subtle, but life-changing. It means you can sit with discomfort without needing to escape it. You can feel anger without needing to express it. You can notice fear without needing to believe it. And in that space between stimulus and response, your life begins to change. Not because the world slows down, but because you do. Because you're no longer caught in the wave. You've become the observer of the tide. And from that place, you can act with clarity. You can choose your words. You can align your decisions. You can direct your energy. That's not weakness. That's power. Power rooted in presence. This is why monks seem peaceful. not because they have no thoughts, but because they don't get lost in them. They return again and again to awareness, not for perfection, for practice. You can begin that practice right now. You don't need robes or rituals. You need a breath. You need a pause. You need a moment where you say, before I move, I will see. That one decision, repeated daily, starts to rewire your life, because you don't need more control. You need more clarity, and clarity comes from awareness, from that sacred practice of noticing before deciding, feeling before reacting, sitting before running. That is the monk method, and it's available to you, not when you've mastered everything, but when you commit to returning to your breath, to your center, to your awareness, again and again, until action no longer comes from pressure, but from peace. Pause for a breath, right here in the middle of the noise, not to stop, but to remember this moment is yours. If these words are helping you return to yourself, to your breath, to your stillness, then anchor this space. Comment below, I choose awareness over reaction. Like this video. Subscribe to stay on this path of inner mastery. Because wisdom isn't found in rushing ahead. It's found in returning to where you already are. Fully present. Fully aware. Fully alive. Discipline isn't built in a moment of inspiration. It's built in repetition. Quiet, simple, unseen repetitions that slowly reshape the mind from the inside out. The world teaches you to chase change through force, to set big goals, make sudden shifts, take control. But monks live by another law: rhythm. They know the mind doesn't grow under pressure. It grows under pattern. It grows when it knows what to return to, and that return is ritual. Ritual is not just routine. It is sacred rhythm. It's not about doing the same thing every day just for the sake of habit. It's about creating structure that anchors your awareness, even when the rest of your life feels unpredictable. Because life will shake, emotions will rise, thoughts will scatter. But when you have ritual, you always have a place to return. Monks understand this deeply. They don't begin the day with randomness. They begin with intention. Before the world begins to ask of them, they ask of themselves, who am I becoming today? That question doesn't need a loud answer. It just needs silence, breath, movement, done with presence. That's the ritual. Not what you do, but how you do it. Not performance, presence. You might think that mental strength comes from resisting distractions. But that's not where it starts. It starts by giving your mind fewer opportunities to scatter in the first place. It starts by designing your environment, your mornings, your evenings, your transitions, so that they guide your attention back to what matters. Because the mind will always follow the strongest rhythm in your life. If that rhythm is chaos, the mind becomes chaotic. If that rhythm is silence, breath, stillness, the mind begins to soften. You don't need a monastery to create that rhythm. You need awareness. Awareness of how your day begins, how it ends, what you reach for when you're tired, what you do when you feel empty. Every one of those decisions is either strengthening your discipline or weakening it. Not because the act is big or small, but because it's repeated. A monk doesn't train for motivation. He trains for consistency. He knows that even the most beautiful thought can't save you if it's not lived. That's why rituals are powerful. They take wisdom and make it walkable. They bring ideas into your breath, into your body, into your routine. And once something lives in your routine, it begins to live in your mind. Mental discipline isn't about having control all the time. It's about having enough structure in place that even when your energy is low, your direction remains. It's about training your nervous system to come back. Not once, but over and over. Back to the breath, back to your step, back to the moment you're in. And ritual is what makes that return possible. When you start building rituals, don't focus on complexity. Focus on resonance. What grounds you? What brings you back to now? Is it lighting a candle before you journal? Is it drinking tea in silence each morning? Is it walking without your phone? Is it repeating one phrase of truth before you begin your work? These aren't small things. These are anchors. And anchors are what keep you steady in the storm. But don't expect your mind to accept ritual immediately. If you've trained it to crave stimulation, it will resist the quiet. It will tell you this isn't working, that you need something louder, faster, bigger. But stay with it. Stay with the stillness. Stay with the breath, not because it feels good, but because it's honest. And honesty, over time, becomes your foundation. Most people abandon discipline because they misunderstand it. They think it's about pushing harder. But discipline isn't resistance, it's return. The ability to come back again and again, even when it would be easier to escape. And that return gets easier when it's practiced daily. Not with pressure, but with devotion. The monk doesn't wait to feel ready. He trains readiness. He wakes with it. He eats with it. He walks with it. Not because he's perfect, but because he's patterned. And that pattern is his power. That's what gives him freedom. Not the absence of structure, but the presence of rhythm. You can create that rhythm. You can begin today. Not by changing everything. By choosing one thing and doing it with your full presence. That presence becomes ritual. And that ritual becomes the frame your mind can rest inside. You don't build discipline all at once. You build it every time you show up, when it's easier to check out. Every time you breathe, when it's easier to scroll. Every time you return when distraction pulls you away. Over time, that return becomes natural. That ritual becomes your rhythm. And that rhythm becomes your strength. Not because it makes your life easier, but because it makes your mind steady. And when the mind is steady, life doesn't have to be. That's what monks know. That's what you're building. And it all begins with the rituals you choose to keep. Not once, but daily, quietly, faithfully, until that silence is no longer foreign. It's home. Transformation doesn't begin with information. It begins with repetition. Not grand, life-altering events, but one breath, and then another, repeated with presence, practiced with devotion. The mind doesn't change when it hears something inspiring. It changes when it does something consistently. That's why monks don't seek new wisdom every day. They return to one thing, one breath, one step, one ritual, over and over, until it becomes who they are. The world is in a hurry to rewire everything, fast habits, fast healing, fast focus. But the mind isn't designed to shift that way. It doesn't follow speed, it follows rhythm. It's not moved by intensity, it's moved by consistency. And consistency begins with one small act, returned to again and again. Not when it feels easy, but especially when it doesn't. That one act is the breath. The breath is your original rhythm. It's the one thing you carried before thought, before speech, before choice. And it remains with you, steady, patient, waiting, no matter how far your mind wanders. It's not just survival, it's awareness. It's the one tool that brings your scattered thoughts back into one place, the now. Monks know this. That's why everything they do begins with the breath. Before action, breath. Before speech, breath. Before movement, breath. Not to slow life down, but to step back into it with awareness. That's not weakness, that's presence. The kind of presence that rewires the nervous system from reactivity to clarity. Your nervous system is always listening. When you panic, it listens. When you rush, it listens. When you breathe, slowly, intentionally, fully, it listens. It doesn't respond to words. It responds to patterns, and breath is the pattern that tells the body, you're safe. You're here. You don't need to run. But in overstimulated lives, people forget to breathe. Not literally, but consciously. They breathe just enough to function, but not enough to feel. They live in short breaths, shallow lungs, tight chests. They don't even notice it, because they've normalized stress. But stress is not your natural state. Presence is, and breath is what brings you back. Not all at once, but gradually, gently. One inhale, one exhale, repeated until your body begins to remember, until your mind begins to soften, until the moment becomes less of a threat and more of a teacher. The first breath won't fix everything, but it's not meant to. It's meant to begin, to interrupt the pattern, to widen the space between thought and action, between reaction and reflection. In that space, you are no longer a product of your past. You're a participant in the present. You are here, and that alone is enough. But you can't do it once and expect change. You must return. When you forget, return. When you're frustrated, return. When nothing makes sense, return. And each time you return to the breath, you're not starting over. You're strengthening the path. You're laying down new wiring. Wiring that tells the brain, I don't need to chase the noise. I don't need to react to every emotion. I can stay. I can breathe. I can choose. Rewiring happens in the repetition, not when life is quiet, but when you stay with the breath while the mind shouts, while the heart races, while the world pulls. That's when the real training begins. Not when everything is still, but when you bring stillness into the chaos. That's when breath becomes power. Over time, that power becomes identity. You're no longer the person who reacts first. You're the person who returns first. You're no longer the person driven by fear. You're the person who breathes through it. You're no longer defined by urgency. You're defined by rhythm, and people feel that. They feel it in your energy, in your speech, in your silence. Because nothing is more commanding than someone who is calm, not because the world is, but because they are. You have that power. It doesn't require more knowledge. It doesn't require a retreat. It requires one breath, chosen, repeated, devoted to, until it becomes second nature, until it becomes your anchor. So when you feel overwhelmed, don't ask what to do next. Ask, where is my breath? When you feel angry, don't rush to fix it. Ask, can I return? When the world feels too loud, don't escape. Pause. One breath. That's it. Because rewiring doesn't begin with force. It begins with a pause. Honored again and again, until it rewrites the story your body tells itself. Monks don't master their minds because they have special talent. They master their minds because they have relentless repetition. Quiet. Simple. Daily repetition. They breathe, not to calm down, but to remember who they are beneath the noise. And that remembering is what rewires them. You've spent years training the mind to react. Now, you train it to return. One breath, one moment, one decision at a time. That's how the rewiring begins. That's how mastery grows. And that's how peace, real peace, becomes your way of life. You've spent your life reacting, rushing, and reaching because the world trained your mind that way. But today, you've seen another path, a quieter one, a deeper one built not on force but on presence. You've discovered that your mind isn't broken, it's just overstimulated. That silence isn't empty, it's restorative. That breath isn't weak. It's your first tool of strength. Monks don't control the mind by suppressing it. They transform it through rhythm, through ritual, through awareness. And now, you carry that same possibility. You don't need a new life to begin. You need a new relationship with this moment, with your breath, with your thoughts, with your choices. The rewiring begins the moment you choose to return, not once, but again and again. Every pause is a step, every breath is a reminder, every act of awareness is a doorway back to your center. So let this not just be a message you heard, let it become a practice you live. Like this video, comment, I begin again, subscribe and continue this journey of inner mastery, because your mind was never the enemy. It was simply waiting for you to return